It's a pleasure to welcome here Stefan Dobrev, who is the chairman of the EIT Governing Board and Executive Committee. Stefan brings 25 years of experience across business, venture finance, and consulting, with a strong focus on turning science and technology into commercial success. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Our panel is between you and the drinks, so we'll really make an effort to make it worth your while. I promise we will. The example we saw this afternoon is really one of many examples of being successful when you work together, between industry, between startups, and between universities. What I want to talk about today is really how important this collaboration is, but also how much work it is to collaborate. It's not something that spontaneously happens. There are examples of it, which is why, once we see the video, really I wanted to start with that quote from a science fiction author saying, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." We already know the future. Some of you already quite successfully collaborate with universities, with industry partners. We just need to find a way to distribute this future a bit more evenly and make sure that everybody collaborates so that the impact for citizens, for people on the ground is there. So we do need to accelerate innovation. I think we all understand that at the rate we are going, we're not going to be competitive, and if we're not competitive, we don't have the wealth we need to defend our prosperity, defend our values in times of war and instability. We do need to spread the successful innovation technologies like data and AI to every sector, socially and economically. And yes, we do have good examples. Let's learn from them and scale them up. Let's create the right conditions to do this well. So what I'm looking forward to is the discussion of what it takes to have the right conditions for that. So, does it work? Of course it does. Most of the time it doesn't. Perfect. Why is this important? We are in a race, and it's a race where, if we're honest to ourselves, we're not doing too well. I do ask audience across the continent, do you think we're falling behind the United States and China in the race of technology? Hands up if you think we are? Yeah. I'm afraid you're probably not wrong. But you're not right either, because this is a race which we haven't lost yet, simply because it's the very beginning. It's not a race where the outcome is clear. It's not even a race where we know the track ahead of us. There is a bend somewhere in there, and we're not quite sure what's behind the bend. Is it a mountain or a valley? But the reality is, if we don't make an effort, this race will become a problem. You probably know there was a report by Italian professor, Mario Draghi, who also happened to be governor of the central bank, who also happened to be a prime minister. He probably knows a thing or two about public policy and a thing or two about innovation. Well, Professor Draghi reached the conclusion that in Europe, there are a few gaps we're facing. We have a decarbonization gap where we're not innovative enough. And this affects things like the car industry, the leading industry in this continent. Of course, you may say Bulgaria doesn't produce cars. Well, that's not entirely true. Bulgaria produces an awful lot of car parts. It's every bit as dependent on this industry as every other state. Now, the picture here is a Chinese electric vehicle with a license plate from Munich, home of BMW, home of the pride of German industry. And yet, this is where the Chinese decided to launch, I have to admit, a not half bad electric vehicle. Of course, the whole innovation space, there is a reason why ChatGPT is on there. This is really the kind of model that is developed and grown in the US. We have one in Europe, and we have every other model coming from the US. So clearly, we're not doing too well on this one either. And of course, the last one Professor Draghi identified was resilience. This is a map of the gas pipes in Europe. As you can see, they all come out of a part of the continent that is not very friendly to the rest of us right now. So unless we find ways to source our raw materials, our fundamental inputs to our industry in different ways, we have a problem. So in this innovation race, what can we do to do better? Well, it's not surprising, is it? Collaboration is what I want to talk about. Because if we collaborate, we'll be much stronger. So to understand what we really mean by collaboration, I thought I'll just go back about 200 years and look at the technology, which at the time was cutting edge, but by now I think we accept was actually quite successful. I'm looking at the steam engine. The steam engine was indeed invented in a lab. So on the left is the picture of something that is now in the Science Museum in London, and it was the first working steam engine by James Watt. For the first time, actually, he could manage to get the whole thing to work at an efficiency that was worthwhile. Now, but that in itself did not make a train, and certainly not an industrial revolution. A whole bunch of companies, which we nowadays would call startups, I don't think they quite knew how to spell this in Victorian England, actually had to experiment on how on earth to turn a steam engine into forward motion. So you actually see the drawings of at least 6 of those attempts to really turn steam engines into locomotives, and at least 5 of those failed. It took an awful lot of risk-taking and an awful lot of failure by startups before you could actually make a transportation network out of it. And the word network is important, because even once they made a steam engine out of it, they actually had to find something to transport. They had to build the rails. They actually had to find customers. They actually had to find even more technology around things like signaling before this became useful. In itself, the invention on the left wasn't very useful, but it couldn't also bridge all the way to the implementation on the right. And if you look at this year's Nobel Prize for Economics, this is your scientific proof, if you like, how important this connectivity is. I'm an economist by training. I'm standing here in the university, so I can't quite resist to highlight this particular piece of research. And what the winners of this year's prize really highlighted was that for a long time, we were inventing things in Europe without any impact on economic growth. It was only when we found the fertile soil of practical knowledge, skills, really, literally skills of craftsmen, technical knowledge, essentially engineering, and of course commercial knowledge, the savvy of investors, of businessmen. Only when all of these came together with scientific knowledge did growth take off. Because then we could apply the same invention, you see my steam engine again here, electricity, and of course AI on top. This only starts being effective once you can deploy it across different networks. Once you start collaborating in a network of knowledge. When, as you can see on the right, you can start building on each other and then get to a much more effective place than an invention itself is. An important bit is the 2 chaps holding a white sheet there. You also need to be prepared to fail. The willingness to take a risk is absolutely essential. And this is a major gap we face in Europe. A lot of people in Europe are rather comfortable. I don't blame them. It's a beautiful continent. It's a healthy continent. It's mostly a wealthy continent. You know, even this country is a lot wealthier than when I was growing up here. I can understand why a lot of people don't want things to change. The problem is things don't change if things don't change, they don't get better. And improvement is still what we all seek. So risk-taking along with fertile ground. Why is this relevant to data and AI? Well, mostly because data and AI, at the current state of technology, really are toys. You know, this morning I was on television, there was a big video around Chinese robots fighting each other in a boxing ring. Well, entertaining, but not very useful, is it? You see adoption rates across companies of AI. And then you actually look carefully what people use AI for, and it's usually if they need to write an email to cancel their insurance. Now, this is not quite a practical effect in terms of efficiency, in terms of growth, in terms of new frontiers that we are hoping for, especially for the trillions of investment. It is only when AI gets into factories, into energy systems, into logistics systems, that the money will start flowing back. At the moment, it's still being invested. Now, a small note, you may notice the money is currently being invested in the United States in Europe, we may well be the one who benefited without having invested. I have no appetite to see a big European generative AI model. This thing is an expensive proposition with unclear returns. I'm just fine somebody else burning their money with that. I do want to see the effect on European citizens though. And what this takes really is application. And as I started, there are good examples. And those examples do say a lot already. So on the far left, of course, I did take a Bulgarian startup. Anyone from Omnio here in the room? Now that would have been too easy. Omnio is a startup supported by EIT that uses artificial intelligence and in fact started using it before this was even a hype to detect things like fraud in financial systems. For our colleagues from Borica, that's probably something highly relevant. Now, this is actually not an easy thing to do, because the problem with AI, as you all know, they're probabilistic models. A probabilistic model cannot quite distinguish between something that truly is fraud or merely a mistake. So actually trying to evolve the mathematics behind it, trying to evolve the algorithms behind it to a state where you can reliably say, no, this actually probably is fraud, is an achievement. Why could they do it? Because they're part of our EIT Digital, now new name 28 Digital, and they could actually find the industry partners to test and scale. In the middle is a company called SmartFab. They just won the EIT Awards. There's a picture of me handing out a big check. Oh, wonderful. It's not the award, of course, that was valuable to them. I spoke to the founder at length after that. What was important for them is they spoke to companies like Goodyear, to manufacturers of car parts, to manufacturers of energy connectors, to manufacturers of all sorts of very practical things. And they could test their artificial intelligence improvement of manufacturing processes on the ground. And that is no mean feat. Industry has been digital for about 30 years now. Now, you will not find a single factory in Europe that is run truly analog. You have PLCs, you have manufacturing execution systems in virtually every manufacturing process. The problem is this stuff was programmed in COBOL in the 1970s. And it has not quite been designed to be optimized by artificial intelligence. It's only when you start designing the algorithms from scratch to work with these ancient legacy systems that you actually get an effect, that you can get up to 30% improvement in the cost of production. You can get energy costs down up to half. There is a report of the International Energy Agency that looks at the potential. You have an enormous positive balance of AI in spite of the energy balance of data centers. Now this all takes, again, collaboration. If you're just an AI startup, that's no good. If you're an AI startup with an industrial partner, and maybe somebody who understands the maths of what you do well enough to adapt it to a legacy system, then you're really effective. The last one, vocal biomarkers. That's an AI startup that analyzes vocal patterns to basically tell if you're sick. Now, you all know when your friends are sick, when on the phone they don't sound quite right. This is a very straightforward way for a human and a really difficult thing for a machine. Now, if you do it well, however, it makes diagnosis 100 times cheaper than all the raft of tests you normally have to take to find exactly the same disease. In fact, you're probably going to find it a bit earlier and therefore make it a lot easier to cure. Again, the AI model in itself is an algorithm. It's not very helpful. But once you connect it to health data, once you connect it to the medical device industry, it starts being very helpful. And of course, yes, again, VoiceMed in this case were part of EIT Health. They found their industrial partners. They found medical device manufacturers who could validate that this is actually medically useful and get on from there. Now, this is not just AI. This kind of thinking, this kind of lateral innovation applies to pretty much every exciting technology out there. So there are 6 technologies mentioned in the competitiveness compass of the Commission. AI is one, but the others, robotics, biotech, quantum, even space, materials, they all rely on applying knowledge from one field, say biology, to another, say chemistry. Knowledge from something like robotics to something like manufacturing. And this lateral innovation thinking forces us to collaborate. We will not anymore be able to do business by creating something in the lab of one company and have the same company bring it to market. This is not how knowledge works in the 21st century. We need to tap into the labs across the continent and then commercialize it also across the continent. And the role of the private sector there is critical, and this is our gap. We're not here today to discuss the whole limits of why European industry doesn't innovate, but it doesn't. If you look at the chart on the left, this is the investment in R&D of public and private funds. As you can see, we are on par, and actually if you look at the pixels, it's even slightly higher than China and the US on public investment. We don't need more money for universities. I know the universities will disagree, but the reality is we're doing just fine. We need to get the private sector to get off their you know what and actually put their share of the effort. Take the risks, change business models, and yes, invest. In this, they need to do voluntarily. You cannot order private businesses to innovate. You need to make it attractive for them. You need to make it easy for them. And this, of course, is what we try to create in the European Institute of Innovation Technology. We create communities of trust where companies feel comfortable talking to universities, talking to research and startups, and actually taking the risk they need to bring innovations to market. Now, we do it at scale, and we're very proud of it. We've supported over 10,000 startups. We have 9, actually no, as of this week, 10 knowledge innovation communities, possibly more to come. We do believe we have probably the broadest impact of any policy instrument. This is no longer European policy by anecdote. This is European policy that affects everyone, but this is still not enough. We do need all of you to pull in. We need all of you to intuitively reach out when you have an innovation and actually find the right collaboration partner. We can help where we can, but in the end, it needs to be a European project. So with that, I do greatly appreciate being here. I'm looking forward to this panel. And I really urge you to find ways to make collaboration easy, because only then does my steam engine of James Watt turn into a transportation network. Thank you very much.